Hey guys, today we're going to discuss Demetrious Johnson, once called the number one pound for pound fighter in the UFC, but is he really? Demetrious has a record of 25-4 and one draw. He has been touted as the greatest pound for pound for many years by reporters, fighters, and fans. His first loss was to Brad Pickett by decision, and to be honest, Brad Pickett was a mid-tier fighter at best. He then racked up a few wins to earn a title shot against Dominic Cruz for the UFC Bantamweight Championship, which is 135 pounds. This is important to remember. Round 1 was very dominant for Cruz, even getting him down to the ground using a judo throw. He controlled the pace. Second round was more of the same. He was controlling Demetrious. Third round got interesting. He suplexed Demetrious and took his back in that round, as well as coming close submitting him. Fourth round, he was able to even mount Demetrious, take him down at will, and control the fight. Fifth and final round, he was suplexing and judo throwing Demetrious around like a ragdoll. At the end of the fight, Dominic won by unanimous decision, and rightfully so. He schooled him. I remember Dominic saying that he noticed Demetrious was too fast on the feet and that it would be a problem for him to deal with since he moved so much. Therefore, his game plan became just to outpower him, to grab him, control him, and wrestle him. That is what other 135-pounders would do too. They are bigger and stronger than Demetrious. After the Cruz fight, a new flyweight division got created, and that was such a huge gift for Demetrious, because otherwise, he would have had to be forced to fight at 135. He would have never been a top contender in that weight class. The UFC hosted a tournament to declare a champion. Demetrious took on Ian McCall and ended up with a majority draw. Although Ian had mounted him in the last minute of the third round, he was ground and pounding Demetrious effectively. It was very close to getting stopped even by the referee, and to be honest, Demetrious got saved by the bell because time ran out. They ended up rematching and Demetrious won by decision. McCall, on the other hand, has gone 2 wins to 5 losses since that majority draw. Demetrious then won a very close decision against Joseph Benavidez to win the UFC flyweight title. He went on to defend the belt 11 times in a row. After winning the title, he had title fights with Joseph Benavidez 2 times, Henry Cejudo 2 times, and John Dodson 2 times as well, which shows you how empty the division really was. In my opinion, Demetrious' best win came against Henry Cejudo. But when he beat him, Cejudo was extremely green in MMA. He hadn't had time to develop as a fighter. 2 years later, when they rematched, Henry Cejudo ended his title reign and technically his UFC career. Throughout the career of Demetrious Johnson, he had chances to become great, but turned them down every single time. TJ Dillashaw challenged Demetrious to fight him, but immediately Demetrious ran from the idea, claiming it wouldn't be fair for the rest of the division. For TJ to get a title shot, or even went as far as saying he would vacate the belt not to fight him. While in the media, he would always put the blame on the UFC for not making the fight happen. Let's look at the facts. He priced himself out on purpose to avoid fighting TJ. He wanted $2 million for that fight, when in reality, not a lot of fighters get that type of money, especially back then. His pay-per-view numbers don't justify that purse. Dana White, he is notorious for not working with other promotions, but he easily traded him for a 34-year-old fighter in Ben Askren. That's the value he saw in Demetrious. Demetrious ends up fighting for ONE FC at flyweight, but interestingly enough, flyweight in ONE FC is 135 pounds. He wouldn't have ever gone back to fighting at 135 in the UFC. But he thought, since it's easier competition here in ONE FC, I can do it. He went on to have 3 fights against unknown fighters, then got a title shot against Adriano Moraes, which he ended up losing by knockout in the second round. He did end up avenging that loss to Adriano twice by defeating him convincingly, but who is Adriano to begin with? Demetrious is small for 135 pounds, So most fighters in the UFC at 135 would try to wrestle him and control him. They also hit harder, so he would be at risk of getting hurt by these bigger punchers. With his hands, he lacks power. He wouldn't be able to win by KO against most fighters. The 135-pound division has been established a much longer time, and due to that, the talent pool is greater. The best thing that ever happened to Demetrious was the UFC wanting to have more title fights on cards, since they were growing and needed more titles to headline UFC events. The UFC creating a brand new division with very limited talent was the reason he became known as a top pound-for-pound fighter. He essentially was a big fish in a little pond. Here is a revealing quote by Demetrious. He said, "I'll say it all the time. MMA is the easiest sport to become world champion. It is truly. You have people who are very good at one thing and have so many holes and deficiencies in their game." That is a very telling statement. It just supports what I said. The reason he feels that way is because he fought in a division with fighters who weren't skilled and he could capitalize on their weaknesses. Demetrious said it's so easy to become UFC champ. Okay, then how come he failed to get the title at 135? Because it has more talent. That's why. Low quality opposition is the only reason he had 11 consecutive title defenses. There's a reason other great champions struggle to defend their title even just a few times in a row, because the talent pool is greater in the respective divisions. That is why Demetrious' records are pretty much meaningless, even if his skills are overrated, because the only reason he was able to look that good is because his opponents weren't good. His flying armbar submission against Ray Borg comes to mind as an example why people think he is special. Those kind of things fool the public into thinking he is this great fighter. In reality, if the UFC hadn't created a 125 division out of thin air, his career trajectory would have been much different. He would have had several losses and probably never won the title. He would have just been another journeyman in the 135 division. Even in his own weight class, he still went to decisions. He got dropped and sometimes was put in bad positions. He wasn't that dominant a champ. The second best thing to ever happen to Demetrious is that the UFC saw him as unmarketable and replaceable. So they traded him for peanuts, aka Ben Askren. That trade has aged poorly, and I could say it's the worst trade in sports history. For Demetrious, it saved his career, because if he hadn't been released by the UFC, he would have to either fight a rematch for the title with Henry or moved up to 135 pounds, since he no longer could make the 125 weight comfortably. In ONE FC, that is what he did. Again, their flyweight title is 135. If he had moved up at that time in the UFC, he would have been exposed again. There's just no way he could have gotten out of his contract with the UFC. Those are ironclad. So he might have had to retire. If Demetrious was so great, he could have at least challenged again for the 135-pound title to try and become a double champ. Several other fighters have gotten titles in two divisions, including Conor McGregor, Daniel Cormier, Amanda Nunes, John Jones, BJ Penn, Randy Couture. Demetrious was just a coward. He didn't want to even take chances to fight TJ Dillashaw when he was offered, he was offering him to come down to 125 pounds even to fight him. Fighters, when they cut so much weight, they're easy pickings, susceptible to be knocked out and gas fast. When TJ did move down, he got knocked out in round 1 in 32 seconds by Cejudo. Demetrious just wasn't willing to take the chance that TJ could possibly make the weight and still be a good fighter. The UFC told him they might shut down the 125 division if he didn't take the fight, and Demetrious was okay with that. Demetrious' greatest record is his 11 consecutive defenses, but in reality, Anderson Silva also should have the same record. But for some reason, when he fought and beat Travis Lutter, his defense wasn't counted only because Lutter missed weight. Nowadays, even if a contender misses weight, they will count it as a title defense for the champ. Also, other fighters have more title wins than Demetrious Johnson. only they weren't consecutive for whatever reasons. Jon Jones also has 11 title defenses, just not consecutive. And he has 14 title wins in the UFC. GSP had 12 title wins in the UFC, and Demetrious also had 12 title wins. Therefore, when you break it down, Demetrious' records isn't that impressive. In conclusion, many people, including Joe Rogan, make a big deal out of certain moments in Demetrious' career because he looked good against nobodies. Say what you will about my criticism, but I'm a true fight fan. I hate when fighters run based on fear and claim it was just not the right time. He had key moments in his career where he could have lived up to the greatness he claims, but he ran. So in my eyes, he's overrated. Anyways, tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. Thanks.